My husband forgot to hang up, and I heard him say to my pregnant cousin, "Just wait until her dad's check clears, then we'll take the baby and leave her with nothing." I sat trembling behind the wheel, but less than 30 minutes later, I had already figured out a way to bring them all crashing down at my feet. My name is Clara, 35 years old, and I work at the Central Library in Seattle. That Friday, on my way home, I was driving past Whole Foods Market when I suddenly remembered we were out of sauce for the roast turkey dinner tonight. I called my husband, Richard, a freelance investor, to ask whether he wanted marinara or garlic herb sauce. Just a completely ordinary question in what I thought was our stable married life. Richard picked up, sounding a bit rushed, but said I could choose either. Before I could hang up, I heard movement on the other end, hurried breathing, and then a familiar female voice that froze me in place. It was Monica, my cousin, who was 6 months pregnant and whom I had always treated like my own sister. She let out a mocking laugh and said to Richard, "Good, did she buy it? Just wait until the inheritance hits." Richard let out a soft chuckle, the exact half-smile he used whenever he wanted to boast about something. He said, "Once the 3 million clears, we're gone. The baby is mine. She won't see a single penny." I felt my heart drop to the floor as Monica sneered. Her womb is a desert anyway. She should be grateful we let her stay around this long. The sky seemed to go dark, even though the sun was still shining over Seattle. I kept driving, but my hands were shaking so badly, I nearly swerved into the next lane. Richard continued, completely calm. "She trusts me blindly. We clean her accounts first, then we file. Easy." That word, easy, was like a cold blade slashing straight through me. But instead of sobbing or screaming like the women in soap operas, something inside me snapped into perfect clarity. I didn't hang up. I hit record and let the call continue, capturing every word as living proof. While the car idled at a red light, old memories flooded back, each one like a film reel I was forced to rewatch. It was Monica who introduced Richard to me at a summer festival 3 years ago. We married after just 8 months of dating. I paid off nearly $60,000 of Richard's student loans. I let Monica live with us rent-free for 6 months when she was unemployed. I paid to have her ex's name tattoo removed because it hurt to see her past. I bought her a crib, stroller, and expensive baby rocker, even though she never once showed any gratitude. All of it flashed by like a giant mirror reflecting my own naivety. The light turned green, and I pulled into an empty parking lot near a park. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel for a few seconds, tears rolling down, but I wiped them away quickly. In the rearview mirror, my eyes were red but not broken. A whisper escaped from my lips, soft but solid. "All right, let's play." I saved the recording to iCloud and drove home, my heart still aching, but my mind lit up with a single truth. Maybe I had been completely betrayed, but that betrayal had unlocked another version of me, one no longer afraid of losing anyone. I had only one thing left to do: survive, and let them bury themselves with their own greed. Once the car was parked in the garage, I stepped into the house with a face so calm, even I found it strange. The faint scent of roast chicken hung in the kitchen air, but it wasn't dinner that made me stop in my tracks. It was the perfume, Wild Candy, that sharp, sugary scent Monica had used since high school, now clinging unmistakably to Richard's coat hanging in the hallway. I slowed down, lightly touched the collar. The scent was fresh, warm, like they'd just embraced before he came home. Richard came over and gave me a half-hearted kiss on the forehead, quickly averting his gaze, a reflex all too familiar in men hiding something. I smiled back, as if I noticed nothing, asked whether he wanted beer or water, and when he headed toward the kitchen, I said I wanted to go upstairs and change into something comfortable. I climbed the stairs slowly so my footsteps wouldn't draw suspicion, though my heart pounded so loudly I could hear each beat. Changing wasn't what I needed. I needed Richard's iPad, the one he always took on business trips and never let me touch. It sat on the nightstand, quiet and unassuming, like a trap waiting to be sprung. I picked it up, took a deep breath, pressed the home button, and the lock screen appeared. I tried the first passcode. His birthday. Incorrect. Second attempt. Our wedding date. Still wrong. Then the third try. Monica's birthday. A number only Richard and she would know. The screen lit up immediately, glowing like a shameless confession from the two people I trusted most in the world. In Safari, dozens of tabs he hadn't closed were laid bare. Countries with no extradition treaty with the U.S., how to hide assets from spouse, involuntary psychiatric hold for wife, how to move large amounts of cash internationally. He had wiped the history clean, but forgot to turn off private browsing, every page still intact. A chill ran down my spine, but my mind had never been sharper. I swiped over to photos and saw an album titled Work Receipts, a name too safe, too convenient not to be hiding something. I opened it, and my heart clenched. There were no company receipts inside, just photos of Monica standing in front of mirrors, hands cradling her 6-month belly. Some of her smiling, some pouting playfully, some taken by Richard from behind, with short captions that shattered any last hope I had. Our baby? 6 months? Can't wait to meet you both. I held the iPad so long, my fingers began to tremble. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, realizing that the man downstairs drinking beer wasn't just cheating. He was building another family, another life, another future in which I didn't exist. And worse, he planned to use me as the final credit card swipe before disappearing. I locked the iPad, placed it back exactly where it had been, checked myself in the mirror, fixed my hair, and walked back downstairs with a composure so flawless even I admired it. If Richard had seen me in that moment, he would have never imagined that just moments earlier I had seen the full truth of my life. But he didn't know, and that was my first advantage in this war. I walked down the stairs, adjusted my smile to just the right softness, then asked Richard which wine he wanted for dinner, as if everything in our marriage was perfectly normal. He gave a forced smile, stepped over to uncork a bottle of Merlot, trying to appear relaxed to the point of absurdity. Just a few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Monica stood on the porch, holding a box of homemade pastries, her face beaming like this was a kind-hearted family visit, rather than the drop-in of a mistress carrying my husband's child. "Surprise visit," she said, her voice sweeter than the sugar glaze on the cinnamon rolls she brought. I smiled and opened the door wide. "Come in, sweetie. I'm just getting dinner ready." Monica sat on the sofa, gently stroking her belly, her eyes glistening as she smiled coyly at Richard. I sat beside her, feigning concern, and spoke about my father. "Dad's getting weaker. The doctor said this week could be rough." Monica tilted her head immediately, putting on that familiar look of concern she's used for years to garner sympathy. "Oh no. I'm really worried about him." But I saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward, just slightly, as if she couldn't quite hide her satisfaction. To them, my father getting weaker meant the inheritance was closer. I watched Monica and Richard exchange a quick glance, just enough for me to see how hollow her words really were. When dinner ended, I stood to carry the dishes to the sink. I turned on the tap and deliberately put on wireless earbuds, gently swaying as if I were listening to a favorite playlist. But in truth, nothing was playing. I could hear every word from the living room, clearer than the running water. Monica leaned back on the sofa, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial murmur. "Good. Push her. We need at least 15 million. I stood with my back turned, but my blood boiled. She continued, "She's an easy target. Her dad adores her. She'll beg him if you play it right." Richard sighed, as if he were being forced into something terribly difficult. "I'll talk to her tonight." I finished washing, turned off the water, and calmly dried my hands before walking back through the living room to tidy up the pastry box, letting my hand briefly brush the underside of the table, where my mini recorder still sat snug. One light tap, and I knew the recording had captured everything. Every word, every breath, Every cruel little chuckle Monica never thought I'd hear. When Monica stood to leave, she wrapped her arms around me with familiar false affection. "Take care of yourself, okay?" I smiled back. "You too. Take care of that baby." In my mind, I had only one thought: save your strength for what's coming. As soon as the door closed behind her, Richard turned to me with poorly disguised excitement. "Hey, I was thinking, maybe you could talk to your dad about the 15 million. You know, family helping family and all that." His voice was light, like he was asking for $15, not 15 million. I looked at him a few seconds longer than usual, just to see if he'd flinch. He didn't. Which told me one thing: he believed he was still in control. I gave a faint smile, nodded. "Sure, I'll try tomorrow." Richard kissed my cheek like a man convinced everything was going to plan. I returned the kiss with all the sincerity he deserved, which was absolutely none. That night, lying in bed, I held my phone and stared at messages all sent from the same number, but leading to two entirely different people. Me, the obedient, gentle wife they believed I was, and Monica, the woman carrying what they saw as the key to unlocking my family's vault. I enabled message encryption, opened my secure messaging app, and sent Angela, my forensic accountant, just 4 words: "Tonight it all starts." And the moment that message left my phone, I knew. I was the one who had just declared war. I set my phone down and sat quietly at the edge of the bed for a few seconds, just to feel the shift in my life. I knew Richard's fortress would begin to crack tonight, because once I've decided to unmask someone, I follow through. I'm not the kind of woman who gets betrayed and waits around for pity. The next morning, Richard told me he had to make a last-minute business trip to meet a partner. I just smiled, poured him another cup of coffee, and asked if he wanted a lunchbox to go. He laughed, kissed my forehead like I was still the naive wife he wanted to believe in. But the moment he stepped out the door, my Apple Watch buzzed with a single notification. "Hampton Inn. Your stay is confirmed. $186.42 processed." This wasn't a business trip. It was the same hotel he and Monica used whenever I was out of the house. I read the notification and felt no sting. Just the confirmation of what I already knew too well. I grabbed my keys, closed the door behind me, and drove straight to Richard's small, quiet office, the one he proudly called his mini-empire. The parking lot was empty, as if the world had conspired to let me do what I had to do. From my bag, I pulled out the spare key Richard didn't know I had. I used to help him with files during our first year of marriage, and when he changed the lock, I kept the old key just in case. I figured today was the case. I opened the door and stepped into the space glowing with sterile neon lights, the scent of fresh paper and toner mixed with Richard's cologne, something I used to find attractive, now only reeking of deceit. I walked straight to his desk, plugged a USB into the port on the computer he always left unlocked. The password hadn't changed. The name of the dog he begged me to adopt, but never cared for. Hunter 2018. I typed it in, and the system opened, almost eager to betray him. I copied over every financial file, email, and bank record to the USB. Within minutes, I had what I needed. Multiple transfers totaling $180,000 to Monica, split into transactions over time through Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, and even a crypto wallet he thought no one knew about. He didn't just cheat. He financed his affair and their unborn child using my money. I opened the right-hand drawer where Richard kept seldom used but important documents, and there it was, a thick folder labeled Emergency Guardianship, Clara Sanders. I opened it, reading each page as my hands began to grow cold. He had prepared papers to declare me unstable. "Unstable and delusional," it said. "Shows signs of mental breakdown due to infertility trauma. Not fit to manage personal finances." The forms included a prepared statement from Monica, her role marked as family witness to erratic behavior. This wasn't just betrayal. This was an attempt to erase me from my own life. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I only felt my body fall into an icy stillness. I photographed every page, every fabricated word, every draft signature. I photographed an unsealed envelope, proof that he was still preparing to finalize my legal erasure. Once done, I uploaded everything to my hidden Google Drive, the one only Angela and I knew the password to. I removed the USB, turned off the lights, locked the door exactly as it had been. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun warmed my face like a quiet affirmation. From this moment on, Richard no longer owns the narrative. I do. And he doesn't even know his empire of lies started crumbling the second I walked into that office. I drove straight to my father's house, the red brick home in central Seattle, where the scent of aged oak and the ticking of the grandfather clock always made me feel safe. My father, Walter, a retired banking executive, opened the door and stared at me for a long moment. He didn't ask anything, just said, "Come in, sweetheart." I placed my bag on the table, opened my phone, and played the recording of the conversation between Richard and Monica. Their voices echoed through the living room, blending with the ticking clock, like a countdown to their own destruction. When the audio ended, my father leaned forward with both hands on his knees and asked a single question, so concise it chilled me. "What do you want to do?" I inhaled deeply, locking eyes with the man who once taught me how to spot truth and lies in business, and said clearly, "I want to hang a bigger carrot. 15 million is nice, but 30 million will make them lose their minds." Walter leaned back, a knowing glint in his sharp eyes. I continued, "You pretend you want to transfer the inheritance early. Tell Richard that to avoid gift and estate taxes, it has to be put into a joint investment fund." Walter nodded immediately, as if he'd predicted this. He pulled out an old leather notebook, flipped a few pages, and said, "We'll set up a new shell company. Give it a fancy name. Vance Reynolds Capital. Sounds legit enough to fool someone like Richard." I nodded, and he kept explaining, in the same tone that once made junior bankers tremble. "We'll move in a portion of real assets, just enough to make the balance sheet look clean. The rest will be structured debt. To someone without deep financial knowledge, it'll look like a thriving investment fund. And," he emphasized, "Richard will be named managing director, the sole executive, full authority to transact." I let out a soft laugh. Exactly his type: power, titles, and the illusion that he's the smartest man in the room. Walter leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was revealing a national secret. "The key clause is personal guarantee for the 30 million leverage line." I knew the term, but he explained anyway, so I wouldn't miss a single layer. If the fund fails or there's fraud, the bank doesn't seize the company. They seize Richard: house, assets, income, everything. I nodded, lips curving slightly. He won't read the fine print. Just hearing 30 million under your control is enough to blind him. Walter added, "He thinks he's moving money overseas with his mistress, but in reality, he's signing a personal debt of 30 million with zero collateral." He closed the notebook, voice even and cold as a verdict. "When you file for divorce and present evidence of infidelity and fraud, the bad boy clause activates. We call the loan immediately." I knew exactly what that meant. Fraudulent debt can't be discharged in bankruptcy. It'll chain Richard forever. "Fraud sticks. It never washes off," my father said, each word landing like a hammer driving a nail. I gripped his hand, feeling his steady strength like the foundation I was about to rise from. "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time since this began, I knew I wasn't just standing on the side of truth. I was standing on the side of victory. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual, brewed coffee, and prepared breakfast, as if everything was still functioning like a normal family. Richard walked out of the bedroom, his face slightly pale from staying up late, likely after a night at the hotel with Monica. He yawned and said, "I have to head out early." I turned around, held the coffee cup out to him with both hands, trying to make them tremble just slightly, like someone who'd just received news too big to fully grasp. "Richard." I paused briefly, then said softly, Dad said yes. 30 million. He said this is the golden chance for you to expand your career. Richard froze like he'd been electrocuted. Million? His voice cracked, half from shock, half from greed rising faster than blood in his veins. That was the moment I knew. He had taken the bait. I looked down at the floor, pretending I couldn't believe it was real. Dad said, if you want it, he'll sign it this week. Just needs the paperwork finalized. Richard stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder with a tenderness I hadn't seen in months. But it wasn't love. It was the caress of a man who saw money within reach. I bit my lip, faked a bit of emotion, and said, I'm making a special dinner tonight. Let's celebrate. All day, I prepared everything like the ideal wife. Cleaning the house, lighting scented candles, setting the table with red wine, steak, and Caesar salad. Everything Richard liked. He came home wearing a poorly masked look of excitement. He hugged me from behind like he'd never betrayed me a single minute. After we finished the main course, I brought out the folder Dad and I had prepared. The investment contract appointing Richard as managing director of the fund. I slid it toward him gently, playing dumb about finance. Dad sent this over for you to sign, so the bank can start. I read it, but didn't really understand. Can you check it? Richard opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, but skimmed at best. Every time he saw the words managing director or full control of investment authority, his eyes lit up like a kid seeing candy. I tried not to laugh as he completely ignored the line that read, personal guarantee 30 million USD. He signed everything like a man on the verge of touching his dream life. The moment the pen touched the final signature line, I stood up slowly, wrapping my arms around him with the excuse of a warm hug. But my other hand had already slipped into his coat pocket, a listening device no larger than a fingernail. One Angela had given me the day before. It clung to the fabric, invisible to the untrained eye. A few minutes later, Richard stood up, saying he needed to wash his hands. I walked into the kitchen, opened the listening app on my phone in silent mode. The sound of water, the door clicking shut, then Richard's voice, lowered, excited. 30 million, baby. 30 million. We're getting rich. All we need is one more week, and she's done. Monica giggled on the other end, asked, when do we transfer it? Richard replied without hesitation. As soon as it lands. She suspects nothing. I leaned against the kitchen cabinet, watching the golden light reflect off the glass door, and for the first time, I saw the full picture. Two people digging their own graves, while I simply stood nearby, holding the match for the final spark. In that moment, I wasn't the betrayed woman anymore. I was the one holding the entire board, and he had no idea that tonight's celebration was the first step into the bottomless pit he'd dug with his own greed. 2 days later, I continued the perfect act, playing the joyful wife thrilled for her husband's upcoming big project. I invited Monica over for dinner, as if we were still one happy, extended family. The table was set meticulously, soft candlelight, rosemary scent gently floating in the air. But what stood out most was Monica's eyes, tense, expectant, impatient, like she wanted Richard to speed things up. She handed me a box of pastries, her smile far too sweet to be sincere. I sat beside her, playing casually. Dad said he'll review the documents this week. He wants everything to go smoothly. I didn't mention the money, because Richard already had. And the interesting thing was, Monica immediately sat up straight, her eyes lighting up. Just one vague sentence from me was enough to trigger her greed. Her urgency was visible in the way she clenched her hands under the table. Richard glanced at Monica like he was trying to signal, calm down, but she was too excited to hide it. As dinner neared its end, I leaned slightly toward Monica, catching the sharp scent of wild candy, so strong it drowned out the food. I smiled softly. Your perfume really lasts. Monica flinched, set her knife down with a loud clink, the entire table shaking slightly. A thin line of sweat appeared on her temple, despite the cool air conditioning. I didn't even need to look at Richard to know he was tense, because Monica couldn't hide emotions, and Richard hated that. After dinner, Richard quickly said, "I'll drive Monica home. You can clean up." I nodded, stepped into the kitchen, and opened the surveillance app connected to the camera hidden in Richard's car, something he never knew existed. The moment the door shut, Monica exploded. "Why is it taking so long? Your wife said her dad is reviewing the documents. Why haven't you pushed harder?" Richard gritted his teeth, keeping his voice low. "Calm, down, it's all handled." Monica slapped the door. "If you don't hurry, I swear to God, I'll tell Clara everything." The moment that sentence ended, Richard swung and slapped her across the cheek. Not hard, but enough for the camera to catch the sound and motion clearly. "Shut up," he said, voice cold and sharp. "Don't you dare ruin this." I saved the video with one tap. When the screen went dark, what reflected back at me was a very small smile. The kind worn by someone who knows the collapse has already started from within. And I didn't have to do much at all. Just let them tear each other apart. But to seal everything, I needed the final piece. The irrefutable proof that would silence any lawyer. DNA. The next morning, I collected the glass Monica drank from the night before, still stained with lipstick and warm from her hand, and sealed it in a Ziploc bag like a toxic keepsake. But that was only half the puzzle. I needed Richard's sample too. And ironically, his DNA had been within reach all along. In the bathroom, his toothbrush sat neatly on the glass shelf, used every night after returning from the hotel with Monica. I put on gloves, lifted the toothbrush, and placed it in a second Ziploc bag. The two samples sat side by side in my bag. One from the pregnant woman trying to steal our fortune. One from the man I once thought would protect me for life. Now both were subjects in an investigation that I myself was leading. That afternoon, I drove to the private lab Angela had recommended, a small, discreet building with a modest sign, designed to avoid attention. The technician took both samples, asking only a few procedural questions. I chose the priority package, results by end of day. I wasn't rushing from emotion. I was rushing because I wanted their world to collapse, right when they thought they'd won. Sitting in my car waiting, sunlight hit the dashboard as I stared out the window, quietly absorbing the eerie calm before a storm only I could see coming. My phone buzzed just as the sun turned amber. An email popped up. "Your expedited DNA results are ready." I opened the PDF, my heart steady, eyes focused with the cold clarity of someone who already knew the answer. The line struck like a chrome-plated blade. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Conclusion: Richard Sanders is the biological father. No surprise, no heartbreak, just the universe confirming what my instincts never got wrong. That evening, I brought the result to my father. Walter sat down in his armchair, put on his glasses, read for 3 seconds, then exhaled deeply, a breath heavy with the weight of a man who'd seen too many human tragedies. "They've both dug their graves already," he said. I nodded, placing the result on the table, the warm lamp glow reflecting off the bolded 99.99% like a red stamp sealing the final chapter of betrayal. And in that moment, I knew. I had collected every piece of the puzzle. The game was about to end, and I would be the one to drop the curtain. 2 days later, Walter sent me a short message. "Bank wants the final package signed." This wasn't the same as the paperwork Richard signed at dinner. That had only been the preliminary package, a soft commitment in principle. Today's documents were the real deal, the official loan contract fully notarized, with binding terms, and the clause, "Personal guarantee, 30 million USD, printed in bold like a tombstone. When Richard got home, I placed the 2-inch thick stack of documents on the dining table, adding a few yellow sticky notes on the pages my father's lawyer had marked as untouchable. I tried to look a little confused, like I didn't quite understand everything going on. "Dad sent this. He said the bank needs your signature on the official package, so the funds can be released soon." The moment he heard released, Richard's eyes lit up like a live wire. He pulled out a chair, poured himself a glass of wine, and started flipping through the stack like he understood everything at a glance. He didn't. But he didn't care, because in his mind there were only two words: 30 million. I stood a few steps away, watching his facial expressions, impatient, greedy, excited, each one clearer than ink on paper. I said softly, "Read it carefully. Dad's financial documents are always complicated." Richard waved it off. "I got this. One look and I understand. You worry too much." The sad thing was, he didn't look. He skimmed like someone scanning a restaurant menu he already memorized. On the personal guarantee page, his hand brushed over without pausing, even though the line read in bold, "Borrower personally liable for entire 30 million in the event of fraud or misconduct. Non-dischargeable in bankruptcy." If he had stopped for just 2 seconds, he might have saved the rest of his life. But he didn't stop. His greed only allowed him to see two things: managing director and control of all investment decisions. On the final page, he signed with such force the paper nearly tore. After finishing, he pushed the stack toward me like a soldier who'd just claimed victory. "Done." One word that sounded like the verdict he wrote for himself. Then he stood up, wrapped his arms around me from behind, and kissed my shoulder, for the first time in many months. "We're going to be rich, Clara. It's finally happening." His voice trembled with excitement, like he was sharing the glory of a win with his most trusted teammate. I let him hold me for a few seconds, then turned to face him. I smiled, but my eyes held no warmth. "Yeah." Just one word, spoken so quietly he had to tilt his head to hear it. But inside that "yeah" lived everything about what was to come. The collapse, the debt, the justice, and the $30 million pit he had just signed himself into. He didn't see it, but I did, clearly, because the board was set. And the next move would be the final strike. But for that final strike to make the loudest impact, to devastate beyond repair, I needed a stage, a place full of people, full of celebration, full of sentiment, so that when the truth exploded, it would hit Richard and Monica like a flare gun in broad daylight. The morning after Richard signed the final documents, I called Monica and invited her to meet at a small cafe inside a shopping mall. The kind of cafe with soft croissants, leather chairs, and warm yellow lights that made any conversation feel more real than it actually was. Monica walked in wearing a pastel maternity dress, her face trying to appear tired, but glowing with hope the moment she saw me wave. I ordered her a decaf latte and her favorite berry tart. As soon as the drinks arrived, I placed a note on the table. "What do you think about me throwing you a baby shower?" I asked. "A real one this time, not a small get-together. I want to give you a party, one you truly deserve." Monica's eyes widened, her body trembled with emotion. I continued, my voice light, like talking about a niece's birthday party. "I'm thinking white limo, gold yellow flowers, glittering backdrop. I'll even hire an MC. The buffet alone is going to be nearly $8,000. Everyone in the family will be blown away." Monica covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears and failing. She cried for real, tears of a woman who believed she had taken it all: the man, the child, the wealth, and even the kindness of the cousin she'd betrayed. Her voice cracked, uncontrollable. "Clara, I don't deserve this." "Oh, God." Then she held my hand, shaking. "If it's a girl, I'll name her Clara." I looked at her for a long moment, watching her mascara slowly smear, watching her swollen belly, the living proof that betrayal had taken root in my life. But instead of pain, I only felt a cold stillness in my chest, the stillness of someone who knows she's entering the final act of a flawless game. I gently squeezed her hand and smiled sweetly. "Good luck, sweetheart." She laughed through her tears, thinking I meant safe delivery, but I knew exactly what I meant. Good luck, because in just a few days, The world she built on my back would come crashing down, and the very crowd she wanted to impress would be the ones watching it happen. As I stood up to leave, watching Monica wipe her tears and thank me one last time, I knew the stage was complete. Only one step remained, and the curtain would rise to reveal everything. On the day of the baby shower, the house I rented for the party looked like a Hollywood movie set. A white limo parked out front, clusters of gold balloons hanging from the ceiling, and a shimmering tinsel backdrop that read Baby Sanders stretching across the main wall. The $8,000 buffet was arranged so beautifully, guests gasped upon arrival. Monica wore a sequin dress hugging her belly, walking like a queen basking in her triumph, while Richard stood behind her, smiling like life had finally bowed to him. No one in that room knew they were just side characters in the public execution I had designed down to the last detail. When all the guests had arrived, around 30 people, including relatives, bosses, and Monica's coworkers, I stepped up under the soft golden lights, holding the mic, smiling gently. "Before we cut the cake," I said warmly, "there is one more gift." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the stage. Monica placed a hand on her chest, emotional to the point of tears. "Clara, you didn't have to." I shook my head. "Oh, but I did." I pressed the remote. The room dimmed. The projector lit up, and instantly the first image appeared, freezing the entire room in place. Richard kissing Monica in the Hampton Inn parking lot. The video cut quickly to Richard cradling Monica's belly in a hotel bathroom, whispering, "We're getting rich, baby." Then came the ultrasound, timestamps matching perfectly. Then screenshots of over $180,000 in transfers from Richard's account to Monica's crypto wallet. And finally, the audio recording of Richard and Monica plotting to steal the inheritance. "She's dumb. Just wait until the 3 million hits. We take the money, we leave. She ends up with nothing." The room erupted, gasps, horrified whispers, chairs scraping against the floor. Monica shot up, screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" But I stood there, unblinking, and pressed the button again. Monica's voice echoed crystal clear through the speakers. "Her womb is a desert." That line sliced through the air like a blade, and the room fell deathly still. A woman stood up. "Monica, how could you?" A man shook his head and pulled his wife toward the door. Another couple stormed out, refusing to even look at Richard. Nearly everyone in the room got up and left, their faces red with rage and shame at the sheer cruelty they had witnessed. Monica screamed in the chaos, "Clara, stop it, please!" But her voice was drowned out by the pounding footsteps of the crowd leaving the house. Richard lunged toward me, but the venue security, hired well in advance, stepped in, gripping his shoulders and signaling both of them to leave. Rain started to fall, icy, cutting rain, as if the sky itself was washing away the lies they had built for months. In the white light outside, Monica tripped on the steps, and Richard tried to shield her, but he was trembling too hard to stay upright. As they were escorted out, Richard turned back, face ashen, like burned-out ash. "Clara, please, please don't do this." His voice cracked, no longer the voice of a scheming man, but the voice of someone who had just lost everything. I stood tall, my hand resting lightly on my belly, the place that once ached from Monica's venomous words about my barren womb. I looked at him for a long second, to remember the final moment of a past life sinking into ruin. Then I turned around, not saying a word. The door closed behind me, and the sound of rain outside felt exactly like applause from fate for the woman who just saved herself, just hours after the party, while Richard was still hiding out in his car, calling his parents and trying to convince them that this is just a misunderstanding. I listened to it all through the hidden camera beneath his steering wheel. But Walter had already sent the final email, a brief, emotionless command: "Call the loan." The bank received the notice the next morning and activated the process to recall the $30 million credit line. I replayed the notification forwarded by Dad's attorney. Borrower failed to meet initial conditions. Personal guarantee enforced. That sentence sounded like a death knell for Richard. Within 48 hours, his bank accounts were frozen. Every asset in his name, cars, stocks, savings, company shares, was slapped with a repossession notice from the bank. I'll never forget the moment Angela called me, her voice calm. The leverage line is now in default. The house of cards is falling. At the same time, a second civil motion was filed in court. Recovery of the $180,000 Richard embezzled through Zelle, Venmo, and crypto. With the evidence I'd collected, every transaction stood out like stars in a night sky. The court took only 12 minutes to sign the order. Richard's parents, the Sanders, were so shaken they didn't leave their house for 2 days. But eventually, they had to face the cold reality. To keep their son from bankruptcy or criminal prosecution, they'd have to pay the debt themselves. The man who once bragged at family dinners that "my parents own a stud farm and a vineyard" now had to rely on those very things to survive. The bank's attorney arrived that same week. The stud farm was appraised for sale, and the Northern California vineyard was listed within a month. I heard about it from Angela, her voice quiet. "Clara, they're liquidating the entire family estate. They have nothing left." Then came the final blow. A few weeks later, once the bank had recovered part of the debt by selling the Sanders assets, Richard was forced to sign a temporary labor contract to work off the remaining amount through manual labor. In certain states, civil clauses allow such labor as repayment when fraudulent debt is non-dischargeable. And so the man who once flaunted his Rolex and dreamt of Malibu mansions now worked as a manual laborer in the very stud farm his family used to own. Angela sent me a photo taken secretly by a farmhand, Richard in a gray jumpsuit, dragging a heavy cart of hay, head down. No trace left of the arrogant man who once said, "We'll be rich." When I looked at that photo on my phone screen, I didn't feel joy. I just felt the closure of an old chapter, a chapter I had lived with trust and received betrayal in return. And in the silence of that evening, I knew. Richard had destroyed his own life with decisions he thought were clever. As for Monica, the one who believed the baby in her belly was her golden ticket, she wouldn't escape the cost either. Once Richard lost the ability to pay, the secret support he used to fund Monica disappeared. The landlord of her luxury apartment called to terminate the lease within a week because Monica couldn't pay rent even for the next month. A mutual friend told me Monica broke down in tears when told to vacate, but no one was surprised. She moved into a shabby studio in a lower-income neighborhood where car horns and neighbors' arguments replaced the sleek glass walls she once flaunted on Instagram. Her delivery came earlier than expected. No flowers, no Richard, no family. Just Monica alone in a public hospital's delivery room, sweat and tears blending together. 3 days later, when the discharge papers were placed on her bedside table and the bills began to arrive, Monica quietly carried the child to a safe haven baby box on the west side of the city. A metal box embedded in the hospital wall, where infants could be safely surrendered for adoption. The security camera only captured her trembling silhouette in the rain, vanishing after placing the baby inside. No goodbye, not even a glance back. 3 months later, just when I thought her story had ended, a friend sent me a screenshot from Monica's Instagram. She was holding hands with a man around 70 years old on a beach in Thailand. The caption read, "Fresh start." Monica's smile in that photo no longer resembled the victorious grin she wore when she believed she was about to get $30 million. It was the smile of someone who gave up everything and still found nothing, except a new chapter, one more fragile and desperate than the last. I stared at the image for a few seconds, then turned off my screen. That was no longer my story. The only thing left to complete my journey was the divorce. When the hearing took place, Richard appeared looking hollow, his eyes sunken from months of hard labor and debt. He tried to speak a few words, but the judge needed only to glance through the file I submitted, evidence of infidelity, conspiracy to defraud, and the $180,000 embezzled, to issue a ruling faster than any court proceeding I had ever seen. In the end, I retained all my personal assets, along with the $180,000 returned via civil judgment. Richard had no grounds to contest anything. As I walked out of the courthouse holding the ruling, I felt the Seattle wind blow across my shoulders, light as if someone had lifted a boulder off my chest after all those months. I sold the old house, too many shadows lived there, and moved into a small home with a garden on the outskirts of Seattle. A yard big enough for lavender, an old apple tree, and a porch where I could sip tea in the evenings. No more arguments, no strange perfume on my husband's clothes, no more nights wondering what I'd done wrong. Just me, peaceful, in a space I chose for myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt with certainty that freedom isn't something others give you. It's something you reclaim, inch by inch, from those who tried to take your life away. 1 year later, I got a call from the hospital. My father, Walter, had passed away from a sudden heart attack. I stood in the small kitchen of my new home, frozen by the news, then opened the blue envelope he'd left for me. His handwriting was still firm and clear. "You lived in your strength. I'm proud of you." Just one sentence, but enough to make me realize that the pain I had endured was also the way I fulfilled the unspoken promise we both once shared. Never let anyone trample your dignity. As his final wish, I started a small fund to support abandoned animals and retired working dogs, creatures silent but loyal to their last breath. It was at that shelter that I met Rex, a retired K9 with ash-gray fur and wise, alert eyes. They said Rex had saved many lives in the field, but after a leg injury, he could no longer serve. Rex walked up and gently touched my hand, as if he understood everything I'd been through. And I knew we both deserved a new beginning. A few weeks later, during a routine checkup for Rex at a nearby vet clinic, I met David, a veterinarian with a warm smile and kind eyes that made people feel lighter for no reason. It began with a few questions about Rex's diet, then short coffees after work, and eventually walks around Green Lake during Seattle's cool afternoons. No rush, no need to prove anything. The connection came like breath, slow, gentle, and at the right time. One autumn evening, with Rex sleeping by our feet, and David and I sitting on the porch, watching golden leaves fall into the yard, I realized my life had finally quieted in a way I never imagined possible. No more fear, no more ghosts of the past, only peace in knowing I was building a new life from kindness. I placed my hand on my knee, exhaled softly, and whispered to myself, "Sometimes, betrayal isn't a failure. It's a door opening for the right person to walk in." And in that moment, I knew my life, finally, had turned a page where I was completely, entirely free. This is my full story. I know I'm not a professional writer, so maybe some parts weren't perfect to your ears. But if you felt any strength or resonance in this journey, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell now.